Hello and welcome to the Guy Shrink Podcast, a bi-weekly show of no-nonsense, thought-provoking ideas and down-to-earth coaching for life. I'm Bill Roman, your host here, and we're recording in Cogito Studios in Toledo, Ohio. Yes, the Glass City. In every episode, my guest and I will discuss the stuff that might keep a guy awake at night. You know, ideas, regrets, feelings, fears, and the self-talk that always goes with them. We're going to discuss relationships and family and working careers, friendships, staying the course, leisure time, sports, life philosophy, and many other pertinent ideas worth considering. We all have these ideas rolling around in our heads. My day job is being a licensed counselor and therapist, and most of my practice is working with men who are trying to figure out life's big questions and little annoyances. These conversations, however, are not to be considered clinical advice. That's just not the appropriate format on a podcast. But if you think you might need some guidance in that direction, there's a lot of qualified clinicians out there who can give you just that. I invite you to discover Guy Shrink as a kick-ass practical show in the regular lineup of podcasts you listen to. And I'd love for you to drop me a line at bill@guyshrink.com with your questions or comments. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and give us a like and subscribe on YouTube. Thanks for listening. Welcome aboard. Keep moving. And remember, you're not dead, so you can't quit. Welcome to Guy Shrink. I'm Bill Roman, the host here. This is our bi-weekly podcast on what keeps a guy awake at night, what kind of thoughts roll around in his head, what's cooking in his brain. And we're at the Cogito Studios in beautiful Toledo, Ohio, in the Glass City. And Keegan Berner, our engineer, is sitting over there on our side, over on that comfortable chair. I'm going to be with a good friend, known Todd for a long time, Todd Smith, who is a life coach, has a wonderful practice called Enliven Wellness, life coaching. And we'll talk a little bit about life coaching as well. And Todd is a graduate of the good school in Michigan. I had to get that in there, you know.
The green one.
The green one, yeah, the green one. And is an ardent baseball athlete and has played ball for probably his whole life. And of course, we've talked about baseball being the most unique sport in the sports world because it's the only sport that counts error. Mess-ups as part of the game.
Yeah, failure is expected.
Failure is expected and noted as well, which is probably a wonderful idea about life as opposed to can't make any mistakes. So Todd, welcome to Guy Shrink and to our little studio here. And so I like to begin with every time I talk to an interviewee, a guest, with what keeps you awake at night?
Well, first of all, I want to say, long-time watcher, first-time visitor.
Okay, good.
And coming at you from the Trilby area of Toledo, yeah. near where my mom grew up. So, okay. What keeps me up at night? Oh, I guess the thing, I fall asleep, great at night. It's when I wake up, when you wake up in the middle of the night, got to go to the bathroom, try to go back to sleep. What is it that's right there? It's financial stuff usually. It's like, thinking ahead of all the possible bills or the things that, what are my kids going to need? Or, where do we have to travel and how am I going to, make that happen? Where's the money going to come from? And then I just have to I do my best to just let it go because in my experience in my life, worrying too much about things that are too far out there just doesn't do any good. And, it's always come, whenever I've been concerned about, where the money was going to come from, how, I was going to make things happen. It would show up, whenever I'm worried about, clients, and whether that's always a worry is, are there going to be enough clients? Are they going to come, are they going to come knocking on my door? That was one of my big worries when I started all this. Where are they going to come from? Then they just start showing up. It's inevitable. Whenever I start to worry about it, if I'm able to let it go, it's, within a day or two, I get more phone calls and, those are the things. It's usually things around, I don't want to say survival. I guess, the financial side of things is about survival.
So please say a few words about how in the world did you find your way into this business? calling. I mean, I think it's more of a calling for you than business.
Oh, absolutely.
Of life coaching.
Well, I was a school psychologist before this for about 10 years or so. And in that training, not in that training, but in that job, I was trained as a coach. But the coaching was around as a literacy coach. I was a literacy coach. I was a coach for teachers and families, for students on the autism spectrum. So I got, background in coaching there, but it never really clicked with me. That it was something. I didn't realize it was a thing outside of that environment. And it was about 2014 that I was using an app. I think it was called the Lyft app at the time. Now it's called Coach Me. And it was for tracking your habits. So, I was doing a lot of healthy things. I was, trying to drink enough water. I was trying to exercise daily. So I'd get reminders and then you'd check in on this app. So I was, I had gotten into really good shape at that point in my life after not really, I've always been in decent shape, but really putting in honest effort regularly. And so I was on this app and I was using it well, using it regularly. And at some point, the guy that developed the company, he reached out to a group of people who had been using this app and said, "Hey, we'd like to train you to be a Lyft coach." So that's what I did. I realized that this is a thing. This is actually a job that people can do. Of course, my mind went to Will Smith in the movie Hitch, and that almost took me out of it. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to. I don't want to be that. But no, really, I recognize that this is something. This is a way to help and support people. So I went through this training, and with the app, it was completely text based to start. And I realized I'd need like 200 clients to actually make a living. So I knew going in that this wasn't really something I wasn't going to pursue being a Lyft coach, but I was going to use it as practice. It was going to be a platform that I could get my feet wet and get going on it. So I really focused my efforts on developing my own practice at that point. So yeah, that's how I got involved.
Well, I know as we talked earlier a little bit about this, you said that the training was what you called neurobiologically based. Could you say a little bit more about what that's about?
Well, it really focused on the training that they offered was I can't remember the program itself, but there are a lot of programs out there for coach training and certification, and this was one of those programs, and it was neurobiologically based, and so the focus was on understanding the mind and understanding basically how our habits work, why we make decisions that we make, understanding the biology and the neurology behind human growth. So that interested me because I have I enjoy science, that kind of background. And a lot of coaching was, especially at that point, was more along kind of the spiritual realms, which, interests me too, that side of thing, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of science behind it. So that was kind of the space I wanted to occupy, is kind of more scientifically backed coaching, as opposed to just like law of attraction, believe it and you'll see it, because that's a big part of the space. So okay.
As you talked about neurobiological and how that works with habits, it's kind of like if I have a repetitive behavior over a period of time, I begin to hardwire, and I think that's the words that those guys use, hardwire the neurons in my head so that a habit I don't even think about, I just automatically do. And so one of the ways of changing habits is to unwire, then rewire, and it comes through practice of a new kind of behavior. Yeah. I'm sensing that's what you were trying to do with your clients.
Yes.
Behavioral change happens through intentionality and then practicing some new kind of behavior.
Yeah, recognizing that it's something that's something that's happening, being self-aware enough to recognize that this is a habit. This is not Just because I've always done things this way doesn't mean I always have to do things this way, that I have to respond this way. And when I talk with clients about it, the way that I kind of describe it is, it's like a path through the forest. You've got generally you walk into the forest, you're going to follow the path that's there, right? Sometimes it leads you to a cliff. And so you might have to find your way, a new path out of there. So you might have to cut yourself a new path and go through some thick stuff to get where you want to go. So that's really what it's about. You've got that hardwired path there, and it's not always the best path. It's just the place that you've gone before.
Okay. I know James Clear and I think what is it, BJ Fogg have done quite a bit of research in habits, and I can't remember which one of these has said this, but it said something. A habit is a cue followed by some action. So if I can pay attention to the cue and then where does that take me automatically, and then if I can put something in between the cue and the acting out, I have a chance of having a new result of acting out. I think it was the cigarette smoking research that they did. You want to stop smoking? Here's an idea. Okay, after I eat, I always smoke. That seems to be the cue and the habit. And so they begin thinking in terms of what can I put in between the cue. After I eat, I'm going to smoke. And they discovered that, of all things, brushing your teeth. After I eat, I'm going to brush my teeth, and then I'm going to go smoke. And it was kind of surprising to see that a number of people who decided, I don't need to do that anymore. But they arrested the acting out because they put something in the middle between the cue and the acting out.
And that's often where mindfulness comes in, is to have that space between that cue and that action. And sometimes just allowing yourself a moment to make a decision as opposed to just following the path, the hard wire.
Okay, so what you're saying is, I think what I'm hearing you say in part of your coaching practice is that you try to help clients, I call it, slow down their reactivity.
Yes.
And their automatics.
Yes, I like that. I like that because sometimes mindfulness takes people to another place. Mindfulness, like to talk about breathing a lot and not necessarily go to meditation. But I do think there's a lot of value in it. But it allows you to slow down that process.
I know in some of my conversations with people, when you think mindfulness, you can kind of see their eyes glaze over because they're going to say, now you're going to talk to me about religion. No, not at all. But just paying attention, and is there something you can do deliberately to stop your automatics and see what happens?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you said, I don't tell people what to do. I invite people to consider doing something differently on their own and seeing what happens, and then if they like the results, to keep doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as an experiment, kind of an experiment with life. What are some things you could try? The funny thing is, often a client will come to me, and I've actually had a couple of clients say this. I came to you, I wanted you to tell me what to do, and this one in particular I'm thinking of, he's like, then I realized that won't help me. You telling me what to do won't help. I have to kind of go through this with your support. You might give me ideas, you might share some ideas of, things you've seen people do, things that you do, but ultimately I have to make that decision on what will work best for me. So that's one of the valuable things is we can kind of imagine, talk through what are some options here. What might happen if you try this? What might happen if you try this? All right, well, what do you want to try here? What's something you'd like to throw out there and to change this circumstance? Let's do it this week. Let's try it this week, and next week we'll talk about it and see what you noticed about what happened when you started changing the way that you address this situation. All right, well, how did that go for you? Next week, it's how did it go for you?
I love the Dr. Phil question. So how's that working for you?
Yeah.
That's good. So I'm a potential client, and I see your name. I give you a call. What can I expect from you when I show up at your office or wherever we're going to meet? What's a Todd coaching consultation look like?
Well, pretty much it looks like I want to understand what it is. First of all, what made you pick up the phone? What made you schedule that consultation? What was happening in life at that moment that you decided I really need to do this? That's kind of the first thing I want to understand. But I don't want to dig too deep into the problems. I don't like to spend a whole lot of time on the problems. I like to spend time on the vision. Okay, now what would it look like in a year from now if you're doing all the things that you want to do, if your life is exactly like you want to see it? What's it going to look like? Explain that to me. Let's kind of get a really clear picture about this. And that kind of really helps to kind of trigger the excitement that gets things moving. Now, the excitement only goes so far. A little bit more important, I mean, I love the vision, and I really do love the emotion, bringing emotion into it, which is hard for people, especially in a consultation. Oftentimes it'll take, a few sessions to develop a level of trust where there can really be that vulnerability to bring the emotion in. But I want to get at least started in a consultation. But then I like to bring in some dissonance, because that's really what moves people. I mean, people don't make big changes when their life is great. It's just, that's when we coast. That's when we just kind of go with the flow, right? It's when things are difficult that we actually make change. I mean, I think that's how we're wired to respond to adverse circumstances. To keep us, I mean, that's just to stay alive, right? We have to respond to adverse circumstances so we can keep on going. So I do like to bring in that bit of dissonance to really kickstart the process. So after we have a picture of this vision, okay, where are you now? Let's go back to the reason you picked up the phone. What's the first thing we can do here that will start moving you in the right direction? And choosing goals that aren't too easy, but aren't, we don't have to go to that vision right away, because oftentimes that vision is something that, may feel unattainable. But that's where I want them to go. I mean, I want them to get something out there, but then we can back it down to something that's, all right, but what's a stretch from where you are right now? What's something that's a stretch? And let's work on those as goals. Let's get that stretch out there. And then from that, so it's like long-term planning, kind of medium-term goals, and then what's our short-term action plans? What is something that in a week that you can accomplish that is in line with that long-term and those medium-term and long-term goals?
Okay, so shifting my focus from my vision is I want to make $1 million by the time I'm 25.
Yeah, those money goals. Why?
They're more lofty ones than that.
Tell me.
They're more lofty goals than that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell me about what the $1 million would mean to you.
In that vision thing, Todd, how in your work with people, how much do you think that people allow certain circumstances in their life to define who they are, and they don't know how to get out of that? I'm thinking of a conversation I had many years ago. A bright woman came to my office, and she was pitching some advertising for a local newspaper or something like that, and we were talking. She's trying to get me to sign on a contract thing, and we were talking. She told a little bit about herself, and she was had just gotten out of a very bad marriage, and was really having a difficult time emotionally, but she was trying to sell me this stuff. And for some reason, I just said, what do you think would happen if you didn't define yourself as a divorced woman? And all of a sudden, she's a puddle of tears in my office, and I'm going, oh, God, what did I do now? kind of thing. But that really stuck with me about how we allow maybe past circumstances to define who we are, and that I don't know how to get out of that because I've never even thought about not allowing those kinds of circumstances to define me. Mm-hmm. So do you find that working in what you're doing in practice?
Absolutely. That was actually, back when I was a school psychologist, that was kind of my recognition of the difficulties of labels was there. I mean, sure, it makes things easy to talk about, but it also kind of adds a lot of weight to someone's self-definition. So I would often try to, understand from teachers, from parents, what it looked like for a particular student who may have had a learning disability. But what's a learning disability look like for them? Let's describe characteristics here. And let's describe how, what we would like to see from them. So that kind of translated into what I'm doing now, where people come in with maybe a psychiatric diagnosis, maybe a self-diagnosis of, in whatever way. It could be, I'm not good at, talking to people. But that's still kind of a definition of I'm an introvert, so I don't do this well. So let's describe what being an introvert looks like to you and what you would like to be like. And how does that, the characteristics behind that label, how does it serve you? Because oftentimes I think some of the things that we perceive as negative have a lot of positive benefits, and they've served us really, really well at some point in our life, at many points in our life. So how do we take the best of that and use it? And then how do we also kind of bring in the other characteristics that are really, really important to us? What are our strengths? How do we utilize those strengths? What do they look like in our everyday life? And how do we exemplify them?
You remind me of one of my favorite sayings that I stole from somebody, that diagnosis is an impediment to insight. That I got this label, whatever it might be, and that's kind of my self-identity, and I don't know how to, it served me well. It's almost like a habit. Certain habits, survival habits, whatever, have served us well in a context. Mm-hmm. That context is long gone, but we still have the habit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if I can begin to recognize that its usefulness is more detrimental than it's useful anymore, mm-hmm. that I could maybe begin to discard that and unwire it and then rewire it to something new. But I really like what you're saying about how defining myself in a certain kind of way can really be problematic in the long run. It thwarts me from growing.
And I sometimes see with people that they protect that part of themselves. They protect that diagnosis, or those characteristics that they are struggling with. To challenge them, sometimes there's a bit of kind of pushing back on that. But that's who I am, But it's just a diagnosis, or it's just a characteristic that you've identified as not serving you well, but then there's a certain protection around it. So breaking that down, and that's why I think, to me, it's so important to take the positive aspects of it, so they don't have to defend it. They don't have to defend some of those things that are I guess troublesome for them, because they can keep the parts of it that are beneficial.
But discard, I don't know if the word discard's the right word, but it's not. It recognizes that the usefulness mm-hmm. is limited, and right. I don't need to let that particular situation control me. Like I'm divorced, or or a single parent, or whatever. That's a piece, but mm-hmm. that's not who I totally am. Yeah. And let's talk about how maybe that divorce, you're in a better place now because of that. How does that circumstance now serve you? You've survived that. You're obviously here right now. And so you've made it through that, as a single parent. What are the greatest characteristics of being that single parent? Maybe it's, I'm resilient, I'm persistent, I'm strong because I've had to do this. Great. Those are awesome things. Now the negative aspects of it, we don't need those anymore. Like, nobody wants to be with me because I'm a single parent. Nobody likes, somebody who feels like they have to be with their kids 24/7. Okay, we can discard some of that, because those are a lot of beliefs, and those are just beliefs. Your beliefs, they aren't necessarily truths. So what are the truths? Let's challenge those. Let's challenge the beliefs and identify what your actual truths are. Or let's think of, I'm sure other people that are
single parents too. What do you admire about them? You know, why are they different than you are? You know, where can we find those examples of things that challenge your belief on this thing that's holding you back?
So, Todd, as we've talked about maybe not defining myself out of certain circumstances, what are some ways that you either through your experience or through your coaching have helped clients to, I don't, maybe I call it like a road to recovery, moving past something that's been blocking me? What are some ways that you think are helpful to forge a new road?
Well, I mean, right now I'm working on with a colleague of mine, a future colleague of mine, who's going to do some coaching with me, Esperanza Resendez. We're working on a program for it's called Flourishing after divorce. It's helping people who are dealing with divorce, who are maybe separated, maybe going through divorce, maybe 5 years divorced. And they don't even have to be like married. They just in a relationship that is ending or has ended. And this is about supporting people in that road to flourishing after divorce. Because as you said, a lot of this, there's a lot of maybe negative labels or negative feelings about failure in that experience. So some of the ways that as we develop this program, it's going to be a group coaching program where we're going to use the group to help support each other along with our facilitation. But a lot of that is going to be around, let's identify the challenging situations that you've faced in life and how you've taken that, how you've catalyzed that into growth. And let's really focus on the growth aspects of this. This isn't, and this is, I think that's a lot of, what I've done. I mean, we both, us as facilitators have been through divorce and breakup. And so we are able to use our experience as well as our training and, the things that we've discovered through the process of, catalyzing the difficult things and bringing in our strengths to continue down that path of growth and recognizing what it is that would be flourishing for us, and how do we develop new skills to continue to move forward in this. And I think a big part of that is having conversation, being able to talk through things in a supportive environment, to be challenged on beliefs that we may hold, and being able to kind of tease out what is a belief and what does the actual evidence show us. Because there can be two people that have had the exact same experience or very similar experience who might perceive something in a different way. So bringing in the perspective of other people going through the same type of thing kind of helps us to break down a belief into possibilities. What else could be going on? Because I can only see this from my perspective. I can try really hard to see it from someone else's perspective, but it's helpful to see other perspective.
Sure. Well, we say in the AA program that there's the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's very clearly defined and set out that if you do these things, your chances are really, really good that you have a good chance of staying sober in this situation. But it's they call it steps. They're steps. There's things to do, which is really important. It's more than just I hope I'll feel better about my situation. Is actually here's things to do to move in that direction. Making hope a reality. Mm-hmm. That hope is really the result of an action, not just wishful thinking kinds of things. And so, what are some of the things that you may have recommended to people as they have this vision of I need to have a different view of my life than what I have? Mm-hmm. I'll use divorce for an example because you brought that up about divorce recovery. What are some things I can do in my divorce recovery program? In working with guys that are struggling in AA, it's what's my plan for sustained sobriety? And so you got to have some ideas of stuff to do, action steps. So what are some things that you may have recommended, just as you're thinking here about, for instance, divorce recovery thing? What might be helpful?
writing. I mean, I think journaling about things, writing about things is important. I mean, I think there are a couple of ways that journaling can be helpful. One of the ways is writing things to get them out of your head. That's one thing. Then the other thing is kind of that visioning that we talked about. Visualization is important. The more clearly that you can see something, the more clearly that you can write something, the more real you can make it. So yeah, the journaling on one side, let's get the negative thoughts down on paper. We can even burn those, throw those away, or, save them off somewhere. And, if you want to revisit them later after you're in a different place, maybe, but just getting those perseverating thoughts gone, but really focusing in on where you are, right now, because in any given moment, you're okay. If you stop and think, you could be really, really worrying about something, but if you can stop in that moment and notice, you're going to notice, I'm okay right now in this very moment. I'm safe. I'm, healthy. I'm okay. And then taking where you are and looking at kind of what this vision really is for yourself, and what are the daily steps that I can take? What are the habits that I can build to continue along this positive path? And what are the habits that I really need to give strong consideration to changing? So those are, setting out action steps and actually writing things down, making a plan. In the short term, that's doable. That, you are 80 to 90% sure that you can accomplish. And even if you don't, you can still come back and go, okay, I didn't accomplish this to the degree that I had hoped, but what else happened? Like what circumstances could change? What things came up? What are some things I would, if I were to redo this next week, what are some things that I'm going to put into place that will make me that much more likely to find success in that? So I think those are some ways that I like to support people. Some tools I give them. I think writing is a big part of that. Envisioning things is a big part of that, and setting clear action plans. I think clarity is a big part of it. In working with clients, whether it's, in a group or individually, one of the things that I often see is generalizing, being very general about things, because then it's kind of diffuse and a little harder to put a finger on if you succeeded in it, which is kind of safe, even though it doesn't, move you forward. So I think the clearer that somebody can be in what they're going to do, the more likely it is to happen.
Okay. Daniel Siegel, psychiatrist, and Daniel Goleman, they've done a lot of work in emotional intelligence and neurobiology, and Siegel is a neuropsychiatrist, and they've talked on numerous occasions about the 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, now not necessarily algebra and trigonometry, but more of a analysis of stuff. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then reflection is the 4th R. And I'm hearing you say those things in what you're saying about reading about. Is there some new information I could put in my head? Number 1. Mm-hmm. Number 2, writing stuff down, like what do I want to see happen, or like you said, negative thoughts. Arithmetic. How's this working for me? Mm-hmm. And then reflection is, how does all this, what is going on in my life? I did this last week. How do I feel about this move? Either moving the needle positively or negatively. Mm-hmm. What's happening? And those are helpful ways of, we're talking about recovery, mm-hmm. having a plan of some kind of sustained sanity. How's that? Mm-hmm. Sustained sanity. And it doesn't just happen.
I think that's all built into the process of coaching in general. And it's definitely built into the Flourishing After Divorce program, along with other pieces. But those are kind of the core of all coaching, really. It should be, at least, to get people moving. And I guess that's a big focus is, I think in terms of my practice, it's very much future focused. It's growth, present to future focused, recognizing where you are now and where you're going. And, we address the past in terms of stories sometimes to help kind of bring light to, our future success, future potential for success, but we don't focus there. I think that's the job of therapy. So, given my, my degrees in counseling, at least I think I'm pretty good at recognizing the line. I mean, what I do is therapeutic, absolutely, but it isn't therapy. So.
Right. Well, as a baseball player, I'm sure you've watched many films. That dates me right there to say that. Films of games where there was a big E happened out in the outfield or at second base or something. And what is the purpose of looking at the big E and reviewing those errors? What do you think that's about?
I mean, even in baseball, that's something that they're getting away from. At least coaching has gone away from that a lot of times. Instead of evaluating what, like a batter, I'm thinking of a batter who's in a batting slump. They've gone away from watching for what is wrong with the batter's swing. Instead, they're queuing up times when they're really hitting the ball well. And when you focus on what they're doing right, it flips that switch. And you don't need to figure out what they're doing wrong, because they already know how to do it right, because there's evidence of that. They've done it right. So that's where we focus our energy on. What are some times that you've done it right, that this has really worked well for you? And let's focus on what were things like then? How did we make this? How did that happen then? How do we make this happen now? Instead of putting all the energy into, because you see you generally see what you're looking for. So if you're looking for problems, you tend to see more problems.
You're making me, I'm smiling now because that reminds me of the research that John and Julie Gottman have done with couples. And it says that 31%, about 31%, there's arithmetic right there. Yeah. 31% of a couple's issues are resolvable. What's that say about 69? And they go, oh, we're screwed. Well, 69% are they're just perpetual. They just keep going for a number of reasons. But one of the things to say is, before you start concentrating on the bad, 69%, that's insurmountable. Something's going right here. At least a third of your game is good. What are you doing that's good, that's making this work for 31%? Let's keep doing that. Create that positive energy. I think they call it positive sentiment override. And that's what you're telling me that we're doing with baseball batting.
Yeah. And coaching in general, I think, is often going to that, coaching in terms of the sport. And I think that's the backbone, basically the backbone of coaching, all coming out. Because, when I went through college, positive psychology didn't exist. When I was an undergrad, it didn't even exist yet. And this all came in the late 90s, really late 90s, early 2000s, that it actually evolved into something real because it was put forward, in the APA.
Well, this is more than just thinking positively. We'll just think positive. Look for a silver lining.
I just blanked on his name. The father of positive psychology.
Oh,
Seligman.
Yeah, Martin Seligman.
Martin Seligman. Yeah. Okay. That's what I was going for. Yeah, Martin Seligman was the guy, as the father of positive psychology. He was the guy that did the studies on learned helplessness, with dogs, shocking dogs.
Yes.
And, when you shock them and they have no escape, he found that, that was learned helplessness happened. They didn't even try to save themselves anymore. But the interesting thing was, it wasn't all dogs that were in that situation. That's how positive psychology was born. He was talking with somebody, I don't remember who it was that he was talking to, who questioned that. He goes, yeah, but what about those dogs who didn't respond and learned helplessness? And he's like, wow, I never, really thought about that. And then that started the whole movement for positive psychology. Let's look at what went right.
What's working well. What's at least working. And so I think what I'm hearing, so when we focus on the negative, our coping mechanism just is survival, just survive. But if we start moving towards the positive, it's beyond survival, it's thriving.
Right.
moving to thriving. And that's a whole different ballgame than just squeaking through and surviving.
Right. Yeah. And to me, that's kind of the demarcation between therapy and coaching. Therapy gets you to some place where you can function. Oftentimes when somebody goes to therapy, it's like they're really struggling day to day in their functioning. And, coaching kind of picks up at that point with, I described it as the white room with, not painted, not decorated. And then we take it to, decorating and making it, what we want it to be, a welcoming, inviting place.
I like that. That's good. That's really a good way of looking at it. Yeah. So moving, not letting certain circumstances define who we are, and moving away from survival to thriving.
Yep.
And having a plan of action to do that. It doesn't just happen.
Right.
I have a plan, knowing that error is part of the game, but it's just part of the game. It's not the whole game.
Yeah.
And you've talked about that group about divorce recovery that you and another colleague are going to start, which I think is a much needed enterprise in our world today. And then you also talked about learned helplessness, and that made me think about over-functioning parents. I guess we call them helicopter parents now, but the subtle message that you end up giving is, kid, you're helpless without me.
You can't do this on your own.
You can't do this on your own. And that's a difficult place to be.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a dynamic in, relationships. I mean, I'm sure, I know you've seen this, but it's often a dynamic in relationships. Maybe based on, the way that somebody grew up, they get in a relationship that they don't think they can function without somebody else beside them, kind of directing them, keeping them, in line. It's one thing to be in a relationship and supporting each other. That's expected, right? But to have the sense that you can't function without somebody else.
Yeah, my mother took care of me my whole life, and now I need somebody else to take care of me the rest of my life.
Yeah, and that's
sign up for this.
Yeah, that empowerment, to bring that empowerment out in people, that's a big part of the Flourishing After Divorce program. Really feeling empowered that you can, you can grow from that experience. It's really about the growth. How can you grow from this experience? It may be a awful experience, maybe one of the worst experiences of your life. But how have you grown from it from then to now, and how can you continue to grow from that? How can you be what you want, what you desire in life?
I always, as you're talking, I always see Viktor Frankl's picture in my head and his wonderful, wonderful words in Man's Search for Meaning. They can take everything away from you except your ability to choose your response in every given situation in which you find yourself. Those are beyond just nice words. Those are difficult words. But boy, how true those are, and how empowering that is.
Yeah, and that's the difference. That's the difference between somebody that survives and somebody that may not survive, or somebody that survives and somebody that flourishes. The degree to which you believe that and follow through with that, I think.
Okay, well, we've been talking to Todd Smith, a good friend and life coach at Enliven Wellness Coaching here in Toledo. And what's your website?
It's enlivenwellnesscoaching.com or lifecoachtoledo.com. Okay. Both go to the same place.
Okay. And they'll see your picture and read up about you and give you a call maybe. I can vouch for Todd being a great life coach, very helpful.
And Enliven Wellness Coaching on Instagram, Enliven Wellness on Instagram, Enliven Wellness Coaching on Facebook.
Good deal. Well, as we kind of wrap things up, Todd, I always ask my guests, what would be like 15-second elevator speech? What words of wisdom do you have for the people, our guests that are our listeners today who are listening in, guys and gals? What might be a few words of advice? What do you think?
I guess my words of advice are always recognize where you are and where you want to go, and put it in context, and know that you're okay in any given moment. You're okay, and bring yourself back to that moment to make movement to what your vision is, what your desires are in life.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, Todd Smith, for being on Guy Shrink today. And we hope all of our listeners are going to have a great day. And just remember, keep moving. You're not dead yet. So have a good one.